and a function of yourself, as it were. Clearly, again, the sheer longevity of your years in Northern Ireland and Belfast, you've gone through conflict, you've gone through a peace process, and then obviously now 2 decades or so of a post-conflict society. Is the kind of thing that you're doing, or maybe the question you're asking, did they transform over those years? Or are you still looking at the same society, asking the same questions, but those issues are just existing in a slightly different frame, conflict versus post-conflict?
I think they have transformed. I mean, doing the work has changed, all right? Frankly, the sort of research I was doing in the 1990s, I mean, I didn't at the time feel it was desperately unsafe. You know, following parades around, watching riots. Although if I now described, if a student came to me now with the research project I did then, I'd be saying you can't do it because the risk and the ethics, you wouldn't be allowed to do it. So I didn't feel it was that dangerous, and I still don't feel that it was. But if I look back on it, the environment one was working in was very, very different. You know, it wasn't easy to go from talking to someone in the Shankill to talking to someone in the Falls directly. Crossing those boundaries carried risks. I, in the 90s, walked into police station and interviewed police officers over parades. That had its own apprehensions at the time for obvious reasons. None of those apprehensions exist now. But what you've also got now, I think, so being free to a great extent of that sense of threat makes a huge difference. But you've also got a much more interesting, I think, a really dynamic sort of space happening at the moment, and a more diverse space. And it makes you think in more diverse ways. And in many ways, you could accuse a lot of us at that period for being obsessed by, and I'm going to use a cliche, the orange and the green at the time, all right? And looking at stuff that men do a lot. You know, I think it would be a mistake for any researcher to get caught in that now. There are still some that come around like that, but I think it's a mistake for any researcher to get caught in that now. So I think that environment has changed quite dramatically.
I'm just going to ask a question about flags themselves, if I may, actually. A flag burning. Anything to say about flag burning? Are you in favour of it? Are you against it? What do you think?
Well, over the years, Joe, I've toyed. One of the things that changed in the research that I did is once you start going into policy, all right, and looking at these things not as just cultural artifacts that people are doing and asking why they're doing it. Once you go into policy, you've got to say, well, what do laws say about this? How do you best reflect people's rights in it? And you know, infamously in the US, you know, they've had, I think almost every state in the US at some point has tried to introduce a law to stop the burning of the US flag. And I think it's struck down all the time. There's 2 or 3 very good books that look at just flag burning in the US alone. And I tend towards that end of the spectrum as saying that, broadly speaking, banning that sort of stuff is problematic. And that burning a flag is some sort of a democratic right. It's a form of free speech. However, I think within conflict environments, I am very keen on discouraging anything like this. I often say the thing I hate most is the burning of effigies on bonfires.
Burning people is a different thing from burning symbols.
Particularly the effigies of real people. So I would defend people's right to burn flags, although I would struggle as much as I can in the setting that you're in to try and persuade people that it's not a good idea. Just as out of interest, I tried to persuade people that taking a tricolour out on St. Patrick's Day in Belfast is not necessarily a good thing. And I've got my reason, not because people don't have the right to do it, but if they wanted to make St. Patrick's Day a day that everybody feels welcome, then our tricolour and our Union flag have to sort of be left at home at the moment.
Thanks very much. Thanks. Go ahead.
But isn't that in a way one of the big issues, Dom, that you talk about. Obviously, one thing you've really kind of worked on is the idea of shared spaces, particularly within urban spaces within the north. But the creation of shared spaces does actually mean sort of downing tools in a way on identities, doesn't it? I mean,
well,
I must do your fourth.
Yeah, no. Here's what I think. I've thought about this long and hard, and how you create a shared space. When we started working on shared spaces in Belfast, when it became part of the policy area, there was an idea that the space therefore has to be neutral. All right, and I think that was a mistake. I don't really know how a space can be neutral in that way. I think that's a mistake, and here's the reason I came to think that being able to express your identity in civic spaces, in public spaces, I think is key to feeling a citizen in that place. It's key to feeling a part of it. And we know that because for much of the history of Belfast, Catholics or nationalists or Republicans couldn't do that. And in a way, we create a more peaceful Belfast or a more peaceful Northern Ireland. We know it was when Catholics and nationalists, Republicans could feel comfortable in those spaces without necessarily having a united Ireland, but they had every right to have that identity in those spaces. So in that sense, being able to parade into the centre of Belfast waving your Irish tricolour is vital, because it gives you a sense of citizenship. You're from Belfast, you can be Irish in the centre of Belfast. So in that sense, I learned that the space can still be shared. Now, you've got a problem if you've got two groups doing that and they're in opposition, and you've got to police that. But broadly speaking, you don't want to neutralise your civic spaces. You want to make it a space where people can express their senses of identity. Now, the other part of it that is important is you also want to create lots of events where people don't either express their Britishness or their Irishness. I mean, a good example of something that's moved on fantastically has been the Pride event in Belfast. And for good civic culture, if you like, you need lots of those events where people from Belfast are also sharing those events without their British and Irish identity. So I would argue that a good shared space has both of those things in, where you can be your political person in that space on some times, but you also can be a whole lot of other identities at the same time. That, I think, makes us a stronger society, and that, I think, makes us different from the one we had 50 years ago.
That's great.